Catherine and Sheila Lyon grew up on Pliers Mill Road in Kensington, Maryland, a quiet suburb about 10 miles outside of Washington, D.C. Kensington was a modest, safe, and tightly knit community where kids played outside into the night. Neighbors knew each other and doors were often left unlocked. The girls' father, John, was a well-known and liked radio personality, providing the family with a mild but recognizable public profile. Their mother, Mary, managed the household and raised the 4 children. This included Jay, aged 15, Catherine and Sheila, aged 13 and 10 respectively, and the youngest, Joseph, at 9. By 1975, Sheila was attending a Newport Junior High School, where classmates and teachers described her as social and outgoing. As for Catherine, she attended Oakland Terrace Elementary School. It was stated by family and other adults that Sheila was the more outgoing of the two, with Catherine often found trailing her older sister. John would later say the following to a reporter: "They weren't shy, they were very confident and trusting, maybe too much." In late March 1975, life within the Lyon household seemed to be proceeding like normal. The girls were excited as both sisters knew their parents had planned a special birthday dinner for them. The girls were born one day apart from each other, with Sheila born on March 30th, 1962, and Catherine on March 29th, 1964. Their mother later recalled that both girls were eagerly anticipating the event. On March 25th, the children woke at approximately 10 a.m. After breakfast, Jay and Joseph headed out to play basketball at a nearby court. Catherine and Sheila decided they wanted to walk to the Wheaton Plaza shopping center, located about half a mile down the road from their home. Before the girls left, Mary suggested they stop and grab some pizza while they were out. Each girl had roughly $2 in their pockets. Mary told them to be home by 4 p.m. The girls left sometime between 11 a.m. and 12. The walk to Wheaton Plaza took no more than 10 to 15 minutes along a familiar route. When Sheila and Catherine arrived, they made their way to a pizza restaurant inside the mall called the Orange Bowl. At approximately 1 p.m., a neighborhood boy who knew both sisters spotted the girls seated on a bench just outside the restaurant. However, they were not alone. Seated with them was a man described as approximately 50 to 60 years old, around 6 feet tall, and dressed in a brown suit. He was carrying a briefcase, and inside or attached to the briefcase was a tape recorder with a microphone. It should be noted that the man seemed to have attracted a group of children to gather around rather than just the girls alone. The man was telling the children around him that he was recording their voices to be played on the radio. He held out the microphone, the children spoke into it, and the man smiled and played along. Sheila reportedly giggled upon hearing the man say he recorded people's voices for the radio. The witness who observed this scene provided a detailed enough description that 2 separate composite sketches would be created. This man became the central focus of the investigation for the next 4 decades, known to detectives and the public alike simply as the tape recorder man. But there was a second witness and a second person at the mall that day, and her account told a different story entirely. I'm sure there are a ton of you guys who are just like me and constantly push off booking appointments, whether it feels annoying, overwhelming, or you just convince yourself you'll do it later. For me, I moved to a new area a little while back, and honestly, I kept putting it off for months. Every time it came up, I'd tell myself I'd handle it once I was more settled, once the boxes were unpacked, once I actually had a free weekend. There was always an excuse. It got to the point where I realized the whole process just needed to be way easier than it's always been. That's where ZocDoc, today's video sponsor, helps me immensely. To be fully honest, I've been neglecting my health for years, and it really does come down to one thing: just making the appointment. ZocDoc has completely changed that for me. I pulled up the app and I had an appointment booked within a few minutes. ZocDoc lets you compare local in-network doctors from over 150,000 providers across over 200 specialties in all 50 states, with real patient reviews and full doctor profiles, so you actually feel comfortable about who you're choosing, and it's completely free to use. Above all else, you need to make sure to take care of your health. Don't wait around like I did. It might seem like a small thing to do, but simply clicking the little link in the description can be a massive step toward bettering your health. Head to ZocDoc today to get started and check that appointment off your to-do list. A girl slightly older than Sheila named Danette Shea was also at Wheaton Plaza that afternoon. She was at the mall with her own group of friends at roughly the same time the tape recorder man was entertaining children near the Orange Bowl. What Danette noticed wasn't the older man with the briefcase, it was someone else, a younger male who had positioned himself near the restaurant and was staring with intensity at Sheila and Catherine. In fact, Danette noticed that the man had been staring at her own group not long earlier. He was lingering and following at a slight distance. The staring was so persistent and so unsettling that one of Danette's friends finally snapped at him. This did little to deter the man as he continued to watch the girls. Danette was later quoted saying, "He was just beaming on them and walking too close to them. It caught the eyes. I didn't say anything to them, but I said to him, take a picture. It lasts longer. I knew there was something wrong with him. I knew he was a creep." She described the man as a white male in his late teens to early 20s, approximately 5 feet 11 inches tall, wearing a light-colored jacket. He had notably long hair, a somewhat unkempt appearance, visible acne on his face, and distinct scars on his left cheek. However, this particular sketch was not widely distributed. Investigators in 1975 had made a judgment call to devote the overwhelming bulk of their resources to finding the tape recorder man, the older, well-dressed suspect whose description had come from a boy whose account could be better corroborated with multiple other witnesses, and thus Danette's younger male suspect was filed away. Around 2 p.m., the girl's older brother Jay walked through Wheaton Plaza to purchase a kite. Wandering through the mall, he spotted Sheila and Catherine at the Orange Bowl eating pizza together with just the two of them. He chose not to speak with them as he saw no reason to and went about his business. Investigators later concluded Jay's sighting of his sisters probably occurred after the encounter with the tape recorder man had already taken place. Sometime between 2:30 and 3 p.m., the sisters were seen for the final time by a friend who watched them walking westward down Drum Avenue. The friend placed them near the intersection of Drum and Devon Place, heading in the direction of home. A longtime Kensington Heights resident named James Mann later recalled that he had waved to the two girls as they passed the corner of Drum and Devon that afternoon, watching them continue down the street. There was at the time a large wooded area along Drum Avenue, a cut-through path through an undeveloped stretch of land that the neighborhood kids frequently used. It was the kind of shortcut that seemed perfectly safe in broad daylight, in a neighborhood where nothing bad ever happened. The sisters never emerged on the other side of it. By 4 p.m., the curfew Mary had set for her daughters came and went in silence. The girls weren't home. At first, this was more annoying than alarming. It was totally normal for kids to be late. Mary thought just as much. It was spring vacation, the mall was right down the street. They were probably just caught up talking to friends. By 5:45, Mary's annoyance was growing more intense. By 7 p.m., she called the police. When police arrived, they had very little to work with, no witnesses to an abduction and no scene of a struggle. Within hours, investigators had already concluded from the circumstances that the disappearance was involuntary. The girls hadn't packed anything. They had less than $2 each. Neither had displayed any sign of wanting to leave home, and they were simply too young for a runaway scenario to be credible. Something had been done to them. The question was what, by whom, and where. The initial search mobilized quickly and grew into one of the largest missing persons operations in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Search and rescue dogs were deployed to trace the girls' movements from the Wheaton Plaza shopping center toward their home. The dogs picked up a scent trail from the mall premises and followed it to the perimeter of a parking lot adjacent to a nearby department store. But then the trail simply ended. The abrupt end of the trail in a parking lot was significant, and investigators interpreted it as a near certain indication that Catherine and Sheila had been loaded into a vehicle at or near that location. Scuba divers searched lakes, ponds, storm drains, riverbeds, vacant lots, and stream beds in and around the neighborhood. Volunteers joined the effort, combing through green spaces and wooded areas. Over the following weeks, the search expanded dramatically, with the National Guard eventually being called in. On May 23rd, Lieutenant Governor Blair Lee ordered 122 National Guardsmen to conduct a systematic search of a Montgomery County forest for the missing girls. And for weeks, a police officer was stationed inside the Lyon household around the clock to manage the ceaseless flow of tips and calls coming coming in. None of it led to the girls. Almost immediately, the family became the target of a wave of predatory opportunists. Callers who had nothing to do with the crime but were willing to exploit a family's grief for money and attention came in droves. The most serious and credible-seeming extortion attempt came on April 4th, when an anonymous male caller contacted John and demanded he leave a briefcase containing $10,000 inside a restroom at a courthouse in Annapolis, Maryland. Police were involved from the moment the call came in. They instructed John to leave just $101 inside the briefcase, exactly enough money to constitute a felony if the caller picked it up, while law enforcement maintained surveillance in and around the courthouse. The caller never retrieved the money. He called back afterward and told John there had been too many police around the courthouse, which implied he had scoped the location before making his attempt. He then gave John a new condition. John agreed, but stated only if he could first hear his daughter's voices on the phone. The caller never contacted the family again. Other extortion calls came and went in similar fashion. Some demanded John stand outside the Orange Bowl pizzeria holding a specific amount of cash. Others provided vague sightings of the girls in exchange for money. None of them led anywhere. There were also good faith tips from the public that consumed enormous investigative resources. On April 6th, an 11-year-old boy named William Krebs reported that he had seen two girls matching the sisters' descriptions crying inside a white two-door Pontiac sedan traveling along US Route 211 in Centerville, Virginia, roughly 35 miles southwest of Wheaton. He identified one of the girls as Catherine and said she had been visibly weeping while another blonde girl sat in the rear seat. Police treated the sighting seriously, expanding the search radius to include Virginia. The following day, a witness in Manassas, Virginia, reported seeing two bound and gagged girls resembling Catherine and Sheila in the rear of a beige 1968 Ford station wagon with Maryland license plates beginning with the partial combination DMT6. The driver, the witness claimed, matched the composite sketch of the tape recorder man, and when the driver noticed he was being followed, he ran a red light and accelerated toward Interstate 66. This report triggered a media frenzy and prompted a wave of citizen CB radio operators to fan out across the area trying to locate a matching vehicle. Investigators searched for every vehicle with plates fitting the partial description, but none matched. Police later deemed this sighting questionable, though they were never able to fully confirm or rule it out. Separately, investigators learned that a man matching the description of the tape recorder man had been reported weeks before the Lyon disappearance, approaching groups of young girls at other shopping centers in the region and asking them to recite an answering machine message into a handheld microphone. These reports seem to confirm he was a serial predator who used this specific approach repeatedly. Police never publicly linked these incidents to the Lyon case, but the tape recorder man remained their primary focus for decades. As mentioned, a major misstep in the investigation was the poor circulation of the second sketch of the younger man that Dinette described. Her sketch accurately described a man named Lloyd Lee Welch Jr., who was 18 years old at the time. 1 week after the sisters vanished on April 1st, the same day media outlets first circulated the composite drawing of the tape recorder man, Welch traveled to Wheaton Plaza and specifically sought out a security guard. He told the guard he had seen the man from the composite sketch at the mall on March 25th and that he had watched an older man with a tape recorder approach the sisters. He even claimed to have subsequently seen the man force the two distressed girls into a red Camaro before speeding off. He was taken to a nearby police station where he gave a detailed 6-page statement and consented to a polygraph test, which he failed. Welch then admitted he had provided false information. Investigators concluded he was likely a teenager trying to collect the reward money. He received what was described as a lecture about lying to police and was released. By the summer of 1975, the Lyon family had privately reached the conclusion that their daughters were almost certainly dead. The case slid into cold case status gradually. Tips continued to come in throughout the late 1970s and into the 1980s at a rate of over a dozen per year. Two serious suspects rose and fell during the cold decades. Raymond Molesky Sr., a convicted child offender who lived 17 kilometers from the Lyon home and bore a physical resemblance to the tape recorder man composite, became a strong person of interest after he murdered his wife and teenage son in 1977 and was imprisoned. While incarcerated, Molesky reportedly told informants and investigators he had knowledge of the Lyon case, dangling that information in exchange for better prison conditions. Police searched his former residence in April 1982 and found nothing. He died in prison in 2010, never charged. Fred Howard Coffey Jr., a convicted child killer in North Carolina who used props to lure children into conversation, was also investigated seriously in 1987 after authorities discovered he had been in Montgomery County in the week following the girl's disappearance. They could not establish his whereabouts on March 25th specifically, and he was never charged. Back to Welch, he was an Appalachian native, raised in a deeply isolated insular household that operated almost entirely outside conventional social structures. His mother was killed in a drunk driving crash caused by his own father. After her death, Welch was placed in foster care for a period, then returned to live with his father. According to accounts investigators gathered over years of interviews, the Welch family engaged in patterns of both consensual and non-consensual incest and had a multi-generational history of abuse toward children. Welch himself later told investigators he had been repeatedly assaulted by his father as a child. His uncle, Richard, was a central figure in this world. Richard had worked in the Wheaton, Maryland area as a security guard. Investigators would later determine that Richard's home and his access to private spaces in and around the Wheaton area were integral to how the abduction was planned and executed. It was Richard who investigators came to believe was the mastermind of what happened to the sisters, with Welch carrying out the physical abduction. By 1975, Welch had also found work with a traveling carnival company, operating as a ride attendant. Carnival workers in the 1970s occupied a largely transient life. Welch traveled extensively throughout the eastern United States with this work, staying in hotels and homeless shelters and making himself exceptionally difficult to trace. His carnival routes frequently brought him to shopping mall parking lots, which meant he was familiar with the layout of places like Wheaton Plaza in ways others likely weren't. What investigators reconstructed about Welch's life before 1975 was particularly bad. Between the mid-1970s and the early 1990s, he was arrested and convicted for assaulting numerous girls across 3 separate states. He was someone who kept getting caught, kept serving time, and kept reoffending. Investigators who later reconstructed his timeline noted he had been arrested and convicted of crimes against a child in more than one jurisdiction in the years following 1975, meaning the Lyon case was not an isolated incident. In 1994, he was convicted of a crime involving a 10-year-old girl in Delaware. He was sentenced to 29 years in a Delaware prison and was still serving that sentence when cold case investigators found him in 2013. He was, at that point, approximately 56 years old. What Welch had actually done on March 25, 1975 only emerged through years of interviews and admissions. He confirmed that he was the person at the mall that Danette saw. He had identified Catherine and Sheila as targets, and when the moment came, he was the one who physically left the mall with them. What happened immediately after remains somewhat reconstructed from his shifting accounts, but the outline that investigators established was that the girls were moved to his father's home in Hyattsville, Maryland. In Welch's final revised account, he stated that the girls were taken to the basement, where he was present while his father and Richard assaulted at least one of the sisters. The basement was accessible only through a single padlocked door at the rear of the property. According to Welch, he was threatened by his father and uncle and told to stay silent. He claimed he did not personally commit the assaults or the killings, but in his final admissions, he acknowledged he had been, quote, the sucker to abduct them. What had led to this break in the case occurred in October 2013. Sergeant Chris Homrock was re-examining every piece of documentation in the Lyon files when he pulled Welch's 1975 file with the polygraph note. Attached to a follow-up record was a 1977 mugshot of Welch, taken after a burglary near Wheaton Plaza. Chris said it next to the composite sketch drawn from Danette's description. The resemblance was immediate and unmistakable. Within weeks, detectives were sitting across from Welch at the James T. Vaughn Correctional Center in Delaware. On October 16th, the first interview lasted 8 hours. When the detectives walked in, before they said a word, Welch opened the conversation himself, saying, "I know why you're here. You're here about those 2 missing kids." He said the girls were killed by his father and uncle, and he was handed the remains and told to get rid of them. He said he transported the remains in large duffel bags to the family's property at Taylor's Mountain in Virginia and burned them in a fire that took days to go out. Investigators went to both the mountain and the Hyattsville basement. At the property, forensic teams excavated the location Welch had described. They recovered small degraded human bone fragments, a single human tooth, a section of charred wire consistent with wire-rimmed glasses similar to the pair owned by Sheila, and remnants of a beaded bracelet or necklace similar to one Catherine habitually wore. Neighbors from the area confirmed that they remembered a fire burning for several days on the property in the spring of 1975. And Welch's own cousin Henry Parker told investigators that Welch had arrived at the mountain that season carrying 2 large army duffel bags, each covered in red stains, weighing 60 to 70 pounds and smelling, in Parker's words, like death. Parker said he had thrown the bags into a fire without asking questions. His sister Connie Akers separately recalled Welch showing up with a heavy, foul-smelling duffel bag he said contained spoiled meat, and asking her to help wash blood-stained clothing. At the basement, luminol testing of the concrete floor and walls revealed extensive human blood staining, from the floor all the way up the walls. DNA confirmed the blood was human in origin, but the samples were too degraded to analyze genealogically. The bone fragments were also too degraded for DNA testing, and in a crushing blow, the single human tooth recovered from the mountain was lost by the lab before it could be analyzed. In July 2015, Welch was indicted on 2 counts of first-degree felony murder in Virginia. The charges carried the potential death penalty. On September 12, 2017, Lloyd Welch Jr., over 42 years after the sisters disappeared, walked into a Bedford County, Virginia courtroom and pled guilty. He was 60 years old. The Lyon family had specifically requested that prosecutors take the death penalty off the table, not wanting to extend the ordeal through years of capital litigation. In court, when the judge offered Welch the chance to speak directly to the family, he said nothing. He was sentenced to 2 concurrent 48-year terms for the murders, plus 12 additional years for other assaults he had committed in the 1990s in Virginia. Because he still owed time to Delaware, he didn't physically begin serving the Virginia sentence until January 7, 2025, when he was transported at 68 years old to Nottoway Correctional Center in Virginia. His father, Lloyd Welch Sr., had died in 1998 and was never charged. His uncle Richard was named a person of interest but was never prosecuted due to insufficient evidence. But Richard's wife, Patricia Welch, was charged with perjury for lying before the grand jury. Caryl Whittier Chessman was born on May 27, 1921 in St. Joseph, Michigan. He was the only child of Cyril and Haley, both of whom were devout Baptists whose strict religious upbringing stood in stark contrast to the life Caryl would lead. Within weeks of his birth, the obstetrician who had delivered him warned his mother that bearing another child would be extremely dangerous to her health. In the fall of 1921, the family relocated from Michigan to Southern California, settling in Glendale. From early on in his life, there was serious concern around Caryl's physical health. Around 5 years old, he nearly died during a prolonged period of pneumonia that kept him out of school for more than 3 months. The illness led his parents to move the family from Glendale to Pasadena in hopes of finding a more agreeable climate for their ailing son. In the short term, the change appeared to help, and Caryl recovered and began to thrive in his new surroundings. He began showing a particular aptitude for the piano and taking lessons with considerable early success. However, the improvement was short-lived. The following summer, after the family's arrival in Pasadena, Caryl got encephalitis. The illness left him completely tone-deaf, ending any potential promise in music. More significantly, he would later claim that the encephalitis fundamentally altered his personality, making him more impulsive, defiant, and prone to antisocial behavior. He also suffered from bronchial asthma and chronic nasal congestion throughout his childhood, leaving him physically weaker than his peers. In 1929, when Caryl was 8 years old, the family experienced a catastrophic turning point. He and his mother, Haley, were involved in a car accident at a busy intersection. In addition to a fractured skull, Haley sustained 2 crushed vertebrae. The injuries left her permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Caryl, seated in the back of the car, initially appeared uninjured until x-rays revealed that he had broken both his nose and his jaw. The medical bills were devastating to the family. His father, Cyril, was already struggling to maintain stable employment, working jobs as a carpenter, butcher, landscaper, and more. The strain of Haley's hospitalization and ongoing care forced the family to give up the Pasadena house and move into a rented apartment in one of Glendale's poorer neighborhoods. Cyril's failure to sufficiently support his family carried a deep psychological weight within the household. He became despondent to the point of attempting to take his own life on at least 2 occasions. One account notes that he fell into extended periods of paralysis and self-pity. Caryl absorbed all of this. He later wrote that he became acutely conscious of the shame and the degradation of poverty during these years. Additionally, this crushed whatever little trust he might have developed in society. When other children had lunch money, he often did not. When neighbors moved in with new furniture, Caryl's family moved into smaller and cheaper apartments. By around 1932, the family had exhausted its resources, and Cyril placed them on the county relief rolls. The welfare rolls carried a special and powerful sense of humiliation for both Cyril and his son. It was during this period that Caryl was first noted by teachers and classmates as both unusually intelligent and deeply difficult. A classmate said, "He was very argumentative in class. He always talked way over people's heads, and he had a superior attitude toward other students. A lot of them disliked him. Caryl never seemed to make friends with nice boys." A psychologist who examined him at age 18 would later say that Caryl's boastfulness was compensation for his underlying feelings of insecurity and inadequacy. In 1936, when Caryl was approximately 15 years old, he contracted diphtheria and was sent to the county hospital. He was eventually released with a recommendation that he spend the next 6 months in bed. Upon recovering, he got a job delivering newspapers and simultaneously began pilfering groceries that had been delivered to the back doors of the neighborhood shops. As time passed, the petty thefts escalated. He started stealing cars, and in one early incident, he was caught stealing a butcher's cash register, but later escaped through an open window at the police station. Then in the summer of 1937, around the age of 16, Caryl was picked up by police on a stolen car charge and sent to a county forestry camp. He ran away twice before authorities realized the camp arrangement would not work. In late September of that same year, he was formally committed to the Preston State Industrial School in Northern California. At Preston, teachers recognized his exceptional intelligence. He spent approximately 8 months there before a judge ordered his release in April 1938 after being persuaded by Caryl's alleged positive behavior. He was free for approximately 1 month before he returned to stealing cars, and also began robbing homes in the Hollywood Hills area. Then on May 27th, he was arrested by 2 radio policemen in front of a drugstore. The officers found evidence of forced entry on the front door of the business, as well as a stolen Ford parked at the curb. About a week later, he was recommitted to Preston. In June 1939, he was released and given $10 and a ticket to Los Angeles. He returned to his parents in Glendale. His father had started a small business in their garage manufacturing window shades and blinds. Within 2 weeks of his return, Caryl was arrested again for stealing and sentenced to 10 days in the Los Angeles County Jail. He served the time and was released, but was almost immediately in trouble again. On Friday, October 13th, he was caught stealing yet another car. He pleaded guilty to the charge and was given a 6-month term on Road Camp No. 7 located in the mountains overlooking Malibu Beach. Caryl was paroled from the camp on June 30th, 1940. After an unsuccessful attempt to join the army, he returned to Glendale and briefly took work with his father. Before the summer was over, 19-year-old Caryl met a young woman and the couple rented a 3rd-floor apartment in Glendale. On the surface, this represented the one genuine opportunity in Caryl's young life to pursue something resembling normalcy, but he chose not to take it. Instead, within weeks, the newly married Caryl began recruiting a small army of former Preston alumni who were interested in committing armed robberies of Los Angeles area stores. After demonstrating to the group that he was the smartest person of the bunch, he was accepted as their leader. What followed was a rapid and reckless escalation of violence that would eventually put Caryl behind the walls of San Quentin. Just after New Year's Day 1941, he and 2 associates were surprised by a patrol car while they sat in a stolen Buick in the Flint Ridge Hills. Rather than surrender, they fought back against the police, ultimately disarming them and driving off in their patrol car. Before abandoning it on a residential street, they used the police vehicle to commit 2 additional robberies. A couple of weeks later, Caryl and a companion stole a Packard convertible in San Marino. As they drove towards Santa Monica, they noticed a patrol car following them. What followed was a running gun battle through the Santa Monica tunnels. The gang managed to escape by firing a shotgun burst into the pursuing police vehicle. When the stolen Packard's front wheel eventually crumbled, they commandeered a Ford sedan in Pasadena and drove back to Upper Glendale, where they abandoned it. The gang's operations continued with what people described as a rash of robberies throughout greater Los Angeles. Later in January, the gang had become well known enough to local law enforcement to earn the name the Boy Bandit Gang, and Caryl was officially acknowledged as their leader. The end came abruptly. While in the process of holding up a gas station, undercover police surprised the gang members and all were arrested. In March, Caryl was convicted on multiple counts, including robbery, assault, and attempted murder, and received multiple 5 to life terms. Caryl was 19 years old when he arrived at San Quentin State Prison on May 11, 1941. At some point, he was transferred from San Quentin to the California Institution for Men at Chino after good behavior. This facility was lighter on security and was often referred to as an open prison because inmates were trusted not to escape. In October 1943, he did exactly that. 4 months after his arrival at Chino, he slipped through the institution's rear gate to a back road where 2 friends were waiting with a car. He was almost immediately recaptured, caught in Glendale approximately 1 month after his escape. He was returned to San Quentin in January 1944. When Caryl was asked to explain himself, he gave an absurd explanation. He claimed to have escaped not for freedom, but because he had been bent on carrying out a plot to kill or kidnap Adolf Hitler. Back at San Quentin, Caryl's skill as a stenographer was valuable enough that it delayed his transfer to Folsom State Prison, which was the maximum security facility where he was now scheduled to serve out his time. On August 6, 1945, he was finally transferred to Folsom. During the early part of imprisonment, Caryl's marriage remained, but as time passed, he urged his wife to file for divorce. At Folsom, Caryl continued to display productive behavior within the system, and in January 1947, he appeared for a parole review. The board decided to grant him an 11-year parole, effective later that fall. On December 8th of the same year, Caryl was released and driven to the Folsom Railroad Station. He boarded a train and traveled back to Los Angeles. When he arrived back, he found his father in his typical state of despair. During his son's years of incarceration, Searle had abandoned the window shade business and gone into the florist trade, but the venture had partially collapsed. By late 1947, he had lost one of 2 shops and was barely making ends meet with the other. It didn't take long for Caryl to step back into his life of crime. By this point, the city was experiencing a population explosion, driven by returning veterans, new defense industry workers, and migrants lured by California's economic boom. Suburbs were spreading across the hills and canyons on the outskirts of the basin. Additionally, there were numerous quiet, dark, isolated spots strewn throughout the hills above Pasadena which were frequented by young couples. These same spots were about to become Caryl's personal hunting grounds. At approximately 7 p.m. on Saturday, January 3, 1948, Donald E. McCullough, a clerk at a men's clothing store in Pasadena, was in the process of checking inventory. Business had been steady all day, and the register held over $800. As McCullough stepped forward to greet 2 men who had just entered the store, one of them reached under his coat and produced a .45 caliber pistol. The gunman ordered him to open the cash register and place the large bills into his companion's pocket. While McCullough complied, the gunman swept the remaining currency from the till, deliberately leaving the pennies behind. He was then ordered to walk to the rear of the store. When he reached a small display case near the basement steps and turned around, both men had already gone. He immediately ran downstairs to alert his employer, who called the police. 10 days after this robbery, a woman named Rose Howell parked her gray 1946 Ford Club coupe at the northeast corner of Colorado Boulevard and Marengo Avenue. Mrs. Howell left her keys in the ignition, which was actually relatively common at the time, and walked across the street to a supermarket. She was gone for approximately 5 minutes, but when she returned, the car had vanished. This stolen vehicle matches descriptions given by nearly every subsequent robbery victim of the culprit's car. On the evening of January 17th, Mary Tarot was returning home to her residence at 3306 Garden Avenue in Glendale with her husband and daughter. As their car pulled into the driveway at approximately 8 p.m., Tarot spotted a man climbing through her bedroom window. She jumped from the still-moving car, shouted at the man, and sprinted toward the window. The intruder dropped to the ground and cleared the back fence moments before Tarot reached it. She described him as wearing blue slacks and a sports coat, weighing approximately 160 pounds. Nothing was found to be missing from the house. This event has never been explicitly confirmed to be related to Caryl's future Lover's Lane crimes, but is often believed to be tied to his broader criminal campaign. At 4:35 in the morning on January 18th, Inglewood dentist Thomas Bartle was driving south along the Pacific Coast Highway near its intersection with Sunset Boulevard, accompanied by a young woman named Ann Plaskowitz. A gray 1947 Ford coupe with a flashing red light forced his vehicle to the side of the road. A stocky man stepped out and approached Bartle's window, announced he was a police officer, and stated he was going to run him in. Bartle, not immediately intimidated, told him to go ahead and ask the alleged officer for ID. He followed the man back toward the Ford. At that moment, the assailant produced a gun and demanded that Bartle empty his pockets. He produced about $15 and handed the cash over before being told to leave the area. Bartle and Plaskowitz drove to the nearest service station on Malibu Road and called police, who arrived over an hour later. He described the man to officers as approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall, weighing about 150 pounds, appearing to be roughly 30 years old, with a protruding lip and crooked teeth in front. He was wearing a gray felt hat with a black band, khaki-colored clothing, and a short jacket. Plaskowitz noted only that she could not see him, but had heard him talk. Neither witness provided a description consistent with Caryl Chessman's known physical characteristics, who stood nearly 6 feet tall and weighed over 190 pounds. Later that same day, Floyd Ballou, a car salesman visiting from Custer City, Oklahoma, asked a woman named Elaine Bushaw to go for a drive. At 7:30 p.m., following dinner at a drive-in restaurant, the two were parked just west of the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. A light-colored sedan with a red spotlight on the driver's side pulled up alongside them. A man got out, walked to Ballou's window, turned off the spotlight, and said, "This is a stick-up, and if you don't give me your money, I will kill the both of you." Ballou attempted to negotiate. He told the gunman he didn't want to give up his billfold because it contained important papers. The man replied that he didn't want the wallet, just the cash. While Ballou pulled out $20 and handed it over, the culprit lit up the billfold with a small pencil flashlight to make sure he wasn't trying to pull a fast one. He then turned to Bushaw and asked where her purse was. When she claimed she didn't have one, the man spotted it in the back seat, and he slapped her across the face. She began to cry and pleaded for him to leave since he now had all their money. The man stared blankly at the couple before returning to his car and driving off. Ballou gave chase with his horn blaring but lost the thief when he cut in front of a bus and turned sharply up a side street. At the Pasadena police station, Ballou described the assailant as approximately 30 years old, about 160 pounds, with a protruding underjaw, wearing a dark hat and a brown close-fitting jacket with dark trousers. Bushaw said the man wore rimless glasses and had a big nose and was approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, similar to her own height. The vehicle was described as a 1946 Ford sedan with no rear license plate. Notably, this is now the second set of witnesses on January 18th alone, and the second set to describe an attacker significantly shorter and lighter than Caryl. The crimes escalated dramatically on the very next day. Around 8 p.m., Jarnigan Lee, a woodworker, visited his friends Harry and Regina Johnson, a retired inventor, and his wife in South Pasadena. Lee was asked if he would take Regina for a drive. Lee agreed. The couple drove Lee's 1940 Chevrolet to the Flintridge Hills. After approximately 10 minutes of sitting there, a car came up the hill and parked directly behind Lee's Chevy. Lee could see a red spotlight illuminating his rearview mirror. Convinced the vehicle was a patrol car, he pulled over and a man got out and approached Lee's window. He asked for ID and Lee began thumbing through his wallet. When he looked up, he found himself staring directly into the muzzle of a gun. The man then threatened to kill the two if they did not hand over their money. The man took Lee's wallet, told him to turn his back, then demanded Regina's purse. After emptying it, he ordered Regina to get out of the car. He took the keys to the car and warned Lee that if he wanted to stay alive, he would remain where he was while he took Regina up the hill. Lee pleaded with the man, saying, "Show mercy. This girl has only recently gotten out of the hospital with infantile paralysis." The man ignored him and told him to stay put if he wanted to stay alive. Regina was so frightened that her legs initially refused to work. Eventually, she managed to walk the approximately 20 feet from the car to the culprit's vehicle. Once inside, the man, whose face was covered by a handkerchief from the nose down, told her to undress. She informed him she was menstruating. He replied saying that he, quote, "didn't want it that way anyway." At one point during the assault, the man reached down and said, "This is equipped to pick up police calls," apparently referencing a scanner in the vehicle. She heard a click and then words on what appeared to be a police frequency. When the lights of an approaching car appeared on the Sacred Heart Academy grounds, the man pulled down the handkerchief from his face momentarily, gave Lee's car keys back to Regina, and told her to get out. As she stumbled back toward the Chevy, she saw the man's car, which she later described as a grayish-tan Ford coupe, accelerate down St. Catherine Street. The brief moment in which the handkerchief slipped from the man's face gave Regina the only clear look at her attacker's face that any victim would obtain during the entire crime spree. At the sheriff's substation on Foothill Boulevard in Montrose, Lee described the assailant as between 5'8" and 5'10" with stained, crooked teeth and a protruding lower jaw. Around midnight on January 20th, Gerald Stone, a West Hollywood truck salesman, was parked on Mulholland Drive with a woman named Esther Panasuk. The couple had been watching the moon rise over Laurel Canyon when a car with a red light pulled up in front of them. A man got out, approached their vehicle, and asked Stone for his ID. When Stone reached for his wallet, the man pulled out a gun and demanded cash. He wore a white handkerchief across the lower part of his face. In his nervousness, Stone dropped his wallet in the road. When the thief bent to retrieve it, the handkerchief slipped, giving Stone a brief look at his face. The wallet contained only $1, and the man walked to the other side of the car and took Panasuk's purse, which contained a single dollar bill and some loose change. He warned the couple to remain where they were for an hour, took their car keys, and drove off in the direction of Cahuenga Boulevard. Stone's description was limited by the fact that the red spotlight had been aimed directly into his eyes, impairing his vision. He estimated the man's height at approximately 6 feet and weight at around 180 pounds, with black hair, a light complexion, and a sharp nose. He believed the man was in his early 20s and possibly of Italian descent. He was dressed in a tight-fitting windbreaker jacket and GI pants and wore a hat. Importantly, this is the first eyewitness estimate placing the assailant's height at 6 feet, closer to Caryl's actual build, though the weight still did not match up. By this point, local media was well aware of a thief donning a handkerchief robbing civilians, and had given him the name of the Red Light Bandit. The most serious of all the bandit's crimes occurred in the early morning hours of January 22nd. This attack involved a young woman named Mary Alice Meza, who was around 18 or 17 years old at the time. Frank Hurlbut, a student at Loyola College, had been dating Mary for several months. A little after midnight, the couple had been attending a parish dance at the Holy Spirit Church, and afterward parked Frank's 1940 Plymouth on Mulholland Drive, approximately a quarter mile from Coldwater Canyon. They had been there about 30 minutes when a car with a red spotlight drove up the hill and stopped directly in front of the Plymouth. A man got out and walked to the passenger side where Mary was seated. He opened the door, pointed a pistol at both of them, and, like always, demanded money. Frank, who had initially assumed the vehicle was a police car, had been searching for his driver's license when he heard the words. He looked up and saw the man's face covered by a dark handkerchief and his hat pulled down over his forehead. When the man told him to empty his pockets, Frank said he had no money. The gunman then ordered Mary to step out of the car. After she did so, Frank was instructed to drive down the road and park. He started the vehicle and drove slowly, looking in his rearview mirror and seeing that the other vehicle was now following him. He accelerated. The bandit's car pulled up until its front bumper was parallel to the rear end of the Plymouth and attempted to force Frank off the road, but Frank was barely able to outpace him. After about 5 minutes, he saw that he had escaped the assailant. He parked on the side of the road, walked until he found a house with lights on, and called the police to report that Mary had been kidnapped. During this time, Mary sat in the front seat of the bandit's car, petrified. As his car raced down the road, the man asked Mary, "Shall I kill him, or do you want me to take you instead?" She told him, "Take me." He made a U-turn and drove in the opposite direction. After approximately 20 minutes of driving, the man turned onto a dirt road at a crossroads. He stopped the car in what Mary later described as a sort of ravine in the mountain. In the darkness, she asked him what he planned to do. When he said she already knew what was going to happen, she began to cry. She asked why this was happening to her and that she had never done anything to the man. She noticed as she watched his face in the dim light that he had a large hooked nose, while a white handkerchief still covered most of the lower half of his face. After listening to her plead for approximately 10 minutes, the man commanded her to stop. He told her to remove her clothes and get in the back of the car, where he assaulted her. After 5 to 10 minutes, he stood, threw her clothing at her, and instructed her to go behind the car to dress. Before leaving the ravine, the man used a small flashlight to make some kind of adjustment to the spotlight on the car. He told Mary to turn her head so she could not see what he was doing. What she heard sounded like metal tools banging against each other. She saw him take something from the glove compartment before walking to the spotlight, and then place an unidentifiable object under the back seat when he returned. The man then drove the girl toward Hollywood, telling her he was going to take her home. He claimed he was from New York and asked her to direct him, saying he was not familiar with Los Angeles. When she asked him why he did things like this, he told her it was because his wife had been unfaithful to him while he was in the Navy. At one point, they spotted a police car on Wilshire Boulevard, and he turned onto a side street to avoid it. At 4 in the morning, he let Mary out of the car approximately 1 block from her home in West Hollywood and warned her not to look back at the car as it drove away. He had put the dome light on inside the car during the assault, giving Mary a clearer look at his face than any previous victim had obtained. She described him as having brown hair and light brown skin and brown eyes. She added that he was only a little bit taller than she was, and she stood approximately 5 feet 5 inches. She noted a short scar extending from his right eyebrow. He had been wearing gloves, a slate-colored coat, and a gray hat. The description Mary had provided was dramatically inconsistent with Caryl Chessman. The final crime in the spree took place on the evening of January 23rd, and provides the most direct evidentiary link between Caryl himself and the crimes because on this occasion, his accomplice David Knowles was also present. At approximately 6:30 in the evening, Melvin Weisler, the owner of Town Clothiers in Redondo Beach, was watching what he took to be 2 new customers enter his men's furnishing store. His salesman, Joe Lesher, approached them. One of the men asked to see gabardine coats. When Lesher explained the store did not carry gabardine, the man said, "That is the only kind I want," but agreed to try on other styles. While Lesher attended to this man, Weisler walked around the store. He had barely returned to the floor when one of the men yelled, and both men pulled out their guns. Weisler and Lesher were ordered into the back stockroom with their hands above their heads. Lesher was then escorted back to the sales floor and ordered to open the register. After he had done so, he was returned to the stockroom. The bandits then ordered both men to throw out their wallets. Weisler didn't have one, but Lesher tossed his through the door. The bandits warned the men repeatedly to keep their faces turned to the wall. When Weisler attempted to sneak a glance, one of the gunmen struck him across the head with the butt of his pistol. After the men left, the employees called the police, then flagged down a cab and attempted to chase the gray Ford he had seen the bandits drive away in, but by the time he found a taxi, the car was gone. When the store's inventory was later checked, $214 in cash was found missing from the register, along with several coins still in their paper bank jackets. A subsequent stock count revealed that approximately $500 worth of coats and slacks had also been taken. At approximately 7:40 p.m. that same day, the Los Angeles Police Department distributed a comprehensive all-points bulletin to all patrol units. The bulletin compiled descriptions from all previous red light bandit victims and witnesses and called for the interception of a Caucasian male with characteristics shared by the victims. Robert May and John Reardon, two ex-servicemen assigned to the Los Angeles Police Department's Accident Investigation Division, had received the APB bulletin an hour earlier. By 7:50, they had already checked 2 cars matching the general description and came up empty. Then they spotted a gray Ford coupe moving north on Vermont Avenue, approximately 500 feet south of Hollywood Boulevard. The patrol car made a U-turn and began to follow. At the junction of Hollywood and Vermont, the Ford turned into a Richfield service station and then emerged back onto Vermont, now heading south. The officers were now close enough to confirm the vehicle contained 2 occupants. Reardon turned on the patrol car's red light. When Caryl's Ford continued to accelerate rather than stop, Reardon pressed the siren. The Ford immediately launched into a full-speed run down Vermont Avenue. What followed was a 5-mile chase through Hollywood streets, with the Ford reaching speeds up to 70 miles per hour. The vehicle crossed Sunset Boulevard and continued south through the neighborhood. When the car stopped, Caryl threw his gun out of the vehicle. He then attempted to flee on foot, but was eventually caught and handcuffed. His companion, David Knowles, was also captured at the scene. When officers searched the vehicle, they found items that immediately pointed at Caryl being the red light bandit. These included a pen light with red cellophane covering its lens, a .45 caliber pistol, clothing stolen from the Redondo Beach store, and multiple license plates consistent with descriptions. A small nut was also found in Caryl's pocket, which prosecutors would later argue had been used to attach the red cellophane to the spotlight. The stolen car was later confirmed to belong to Rose Howell, which was stolen back on January 13th. After a 72-hour interrogation, during which Caryl later claimed he was beaten and subjected to torture, he signed a confession implicating himself in the bandit crimes. However, as mentioned several times by now, the descriptions provided by victims did not exactly match up with Caryl's actual characteristics. Additionally, Mary had previously failed to identify Caryl from a photo lineup. She only made positive identifications after officers allegedly told them that they had arrested the culprit and that he had already confessed. In late January 1948, he was formally indicted on 18 counts of robbery, kidnapping, and rape. His partner, David Knowles, was charged as an accessory in the store robberies, but he was able to successfully appeal his conviction a couple of years later. Caryl maintained his innocence throughout the entire investigation. He argued he was the victim of mistaken identity, or alternatively, of a conspiracy to frame him. He claimed to know the true identity of the Red Light Bandit, but refused to name the person. The trial began on April 4th, 1948, and would prove to be one of the most consequential and criticized criminal proceedings in California history. Even before proceedings began, Caryl made what officials have consistently called a catastrophic error. He dismissed his defense attorney and announced that he would represent himself. His decision to do so placed him before Judge Charles Frick, who had sentenced more people to death than any other judge in California history. Frick made no secret of his contempt for Caryl from the start. When Caryl asked for daily transcripts of the proceedings, Frick denied it, something he had reportedly never done before. When he asked for guidance on courtroom procedure, Frick snapped, telling Caryl that the courtroom was not law school. On May 21st, after a 3 3-week trial, the jury returned guilty verdicts on 17 of the 18 counts. Frick sentenced him to death twice. Caryl, then 26 years old, was reportedly smiling defiantly as the sentences were read. 2 days before Caryl's official sentencing, a crucial development upended the case's landscape. Ernest Perry, the elderly court reporter who had transcribed the trial proceedings, died of a coronary thrombosis, leaving behind approximately 1,800 pages of shorthand notes that had not yet been fully typed into a formal transcript. Caryl immediately moved for a new trial on the grounds that an accurate record of the proceedings could no longer be produced. Frick denied the motion, noting that California's rules requiring a new trial in the event of a reporter's death applied to civil cases, not criminal ones. In September 1948, responsibility for transcribing Perry's notes was handed to a man named Stanley Fraser, who happened to be the uncle of lead prosecutor J. Miller Levy. Fraser received $10,000 for the task, reportedly 3 times the standard rate. He was also a man who had been arrested on multiple occasions for drunkenness, including once during a court appearance. Caryl argued that the transcript Fraser produced was irredeemably biased and riddled with errors. This dispute over the accuracy of the transcript would become the central legal battle of the next decade of Caryl's life. Transferred to San Quentin State Prison, Caryl faced an initial execution date of March 28, 1952, but he did not go quietly. Over the course of nearly 12 years, Caryl filed appeals, petitions, and motions before an extraordinary number of courts. By some accounts, he submitted his appeal 42 times. In 1957, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered California to conduct a thorough review of the transcripts. The review concluded the transcripts were accurate, dealing a major blow to Caryl's primary argument. He averted execution 8 separate times, often by hours. During this entire period, 94 other men were executed in the same prison while Caryl waited. In the meantime, he channeled his energy into writing. He did this secretly since prison authorities did not want him working on anything other than legal documents. He disguised the shorthand drafts as legal notation to survive cell searches, and manuscripts were smuggled out of the prison by his attorney. Additionally, he wrote several books about his life and his experience on death row. Together, his 4 books earned him over $100,000, which was a remarkable sum for the era. These books also transformed him, in a sense, from a criminal into a celebrity. On the morning of May 2, 1960, Caryl, 38 years old, was led to the gas chamber at San Quentin State Prison. In a final, almost theatrical twist, his attorneys had persuaded a California Supreme Court justice to issue a last-minute stay of execution pending a new motion. The justice's secretary then phoned the prison to relay the news and misdialed the number. By the time the call was correctly routed to the execution chamber, the process had already begun and could not be safely halted. During the execution itself, Caryl reportedly nodded his head vigorously, a pre-arranged signal to the reporters watching through the chamber window that he was experiencing pain. He died at 10:03 a.m. His last public statement was, "I hope my fate has contributed something toward ending capital punishment." Caryl had requested that his remains be interred alongside his parents at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. The cemetery refused on moral grounds, citing his shameful reputation. His ashes were initially buried at Mount Tamalpais Cemetery in San Rafael, then disinterred in 1974 by his attorney Rosalie Asher and scattered off the coast of Santa Cruz Island.